In the shadowed corridors of Westmere Palace, where whispers carry more weight than crowns and loyalty can shatter like crystal, one guard's sworn silence would be tested by a moment that could topple a kingdom. Witness that autumn evening would force him to choose between duty to the crown and protecting an innocent life, a choice that would haunt him forever and reshape the very foundations of the royal family he'd sworn to protect. The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Westmere Palace as Captain Marcus Sterling completed his evening rounds through the East Wing. 23 years of service to the crown had taught him to notice every shadow, every whisper, every glance that lingered too long in the marble hallways. Tonight felt different somehow, charged with an electricity that made the fine hairs on his neck stand on end. Marcus paused at the intersection of two corridors, his polished boots silent on the Persian carpet that had witnessed centuries of royal secrets. The palace seemed quieter than usual, despite hosting the quarterly family gathering that brought together 3 generations of the House of Aldridge. These events, while maintaining the facade of family unity for the public, often crackled with underlying tensions the palace staff had learned to navigate carefully. At 51, Marcus had seen enough palace intrigue to fill several lifetimes. His weathered face bore the marks of a man who had served in military conflicts before dedicating his life to protecting the royal family. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, and his reputation for discretion was legendary among the palace staff. Queens had confided in him, princes had sought his counsel, and he had kept every secret locked away in the vault of his conscience. The current royal family was a complex tapestry of personalities and ambitions. King Edmund III, now in his 70s, ruled with the wisdom of age but the weariness of long years on the throne. His wife, Queen Isabel, had always been the steel backbone of the monarchy, making difficult decisions with surgical precision. Their eldest son, Crown Prince Alexander, was married to the beloved Princess Elena, whose grace and genuine warmth had won the hearts of the nation. But it was the king's second marriage, following Queen Isabel's death 5 years prior, that had introduced new dynamics to the family structure. Queen Victoria, formerly a duchess from a neighboring kingdom, had brought her own son from her first marriage into the royal household. Prince Damien Rothschild, now 28, had never quite found his place in the established hierarchy and carried himself with the chip-on-shoulder attitude of someone who felt perpetually overlooked. Marcus remembered the day Prince Damien had arrived at the palace. Even as a teenager, there had been something calculating about him, a hunger in his eyes that went beyond normal ambition. Over the years, Marcus had observed how Damien maneuvered through palace politics, always positioning himself advantageously, always watching for opportunities to advance his standing. Tonight, the family had gathered for what the press had been told was a routine dinner celebrating the harvest season in the kingdom's agricultural regions. In reality, Marcus knew these gatherings were often used to discuss matters of state that couldn't be handled through official channels. The tension in the air suggested tonight's discussions had been particularly heated. As Marcus continued his patrol, he reflected on the changes he'd witnessed in Princess Elena over the past few months. The princess, normally radiant and confident, had seemed subdued lately, often appearing lost in thought during public appearances. The press had speculated about everything from marital troubles to health concerns, but Marcus had noticed something else. The way she seemed to tense whenever Prince Damien entered a room, the careful distance she maintained from him during family events. The sound of raised voices drifted from the direction of the blue salon, causing Marcus to alter his route. It wasn't unusual for passionate discussions to occur during family gatherings, but something about the tone made his instincts prickle with concern. As he approached the ornate double doors, he could make out the distinct cadences of familiar voices.
"You cannot continue to ignore the reality of the situation,"
came Prince Damien's voice, sharp with frustration. The people need to see strength, not this constant pandering to sentiment. Sentiment? Princess Elena's voice was strained but controlled. You mean compassion? Understanding. The qualities that actually connect a monarchy to its people. Marcus positioned himself discreetly near a marble pillar, where he could observe the scene through the partially open doors. The blue salon, with its rich sapphire curtains and gilt-framed portraits of past monarchs, had been the site of countless family discussions over the centuries. Tonight it seemed to pulse with an energy that felt almost dangerous. Prince Damien stood near the massive fireplace, his tall frame silhouetted against the dancing flames. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his expensive suit impeccable, but there was something predatory in his posture. Princess Elena stood near the window, the moonlight catching the auburn highlights in her brown hair. Even from his position, Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. "Your naive idealism is exactly what's wrong with this family," Damien continued, his voice carrying a cruel edge that Marcus had never heard him use in public. "Public smiles actually matter. You think the people care about your feelings when they're struggling to pay their bills? At least I'm trying to help them," Elena replied, her voice rising slightly. "At least I'm not spending my time scheming about how to manipulate them for personal gain." Damien's laugh was cold and bitter. "Personal gain? Everything I do is for this family, for this kingdom. Unlike you, I understand that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. Sometimes people have to be guided toward what's best for everyone." Marcus felt his muscles tense. There was something in Damien's tone that triggered every alarm bell in his security-trained mind. He shifted slightly, ensuring he had a clear view of both figures while remaining concealed. "Guided?" Elena's voice carried a note of disbelief. "Is that what you call the pressure you've been putting on the agricultural minister? The threats you've been making to journalists who write unfavorable stories?" "I call it effective leadership," Damien replied, taking a step closer to the princess. "Something this family desperately needs more of." Marcus watched as the distance between the two figures decreased, noting the subtle change in Elena's posture as she seemed to recognize something threatening in Damien's approach. Years of reading body language and assessing potential threats screamed at Marcus that this conversation was heading toward dangerous territory. "You need to understand something, Elena," Damien said, his voice dropping to an almost intimate level that somehow made it more menacing. "Your position in this family, your influence, your future, it all depends on making the right choices, supporting the right people." "Are you threatening me?" Elena's voice was barely above a whisper, but Marcus caught the tremor of fear beneath her attempt at defiance. "I'm offering you an opportunity," Damien replied, now close enough that Marcus could see his hand reaching toward Elena's arm. "Join me in pushing for real change in how this kingdom is run. Help me convince Alexander and the king that stronger measures are necessary." "Or what?" Elena demanded. But Marcus could see her backing toward the window, clearly trying to maintain distance. "Or find yourself increasingly isolated. Increasingly vulnerable." Damien's hand finally made contact with Elena's arm, gripping it with what Marcus's trained eye immediately recognized as too much pressure. "Accidents happen, Elena. Even to princesses. Especially to princesses who don't understand their place." The threat was unmistakable, and Marcus felt his hand instinctively move toward his weapon. But before he could act, Elena surprised both men by attempting to pull away from Damien's grip. The movement was sharp and desperate, clearly born from genuine fear rather than mere discomfort. "Let go of me," she said, her voice stronger now but still carrying that underlying tremor. "I don't think you understand the gravity of what I'm telling you," Damien replied, his grip tightening. "This isn't a request, Elena. This is how things are going to be from now on." Marcus had seen enough. His oath to protect the royal family included protecting them from each other when necessary, and what he was witnessing had crossed every line of acceptable behavior. But as he prepared to intervene, the situation escalated beyond even his expectations. Elena's attempt to break free became more forceful, and Damien's response was swift and violent. His free hand rose as if to strike her, the motion carrying all the momentum of someone accustomed to using intimidation and physical dominance to get his way. But the blow never landed. The salon door burst open with a sound like thunder, and Prince Alexander strode into the room with the controlled fury of a man who had heard enough. Marcus had been so focused on the confrontation between Elena and Damien that he hadn't noticed the crown prince's approach, but Alexander's timing was perfect. "Remove your hands from my wife," Alexander said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone born to rule. "Now." The tableau froze for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Damien's hand was still raised. Elena was pressed against the window with fear written across her features, and Alexander stood in the doorway like an avenging angel. Marcus remained hidden, knowing that his intervention might now escalate the situation beyond what Alexander could handle diplomatically. "Alexander," Damien said, slowly lowering his hand but not releasing Elena's arm, "this is a private conversation. Nothing involving threats to my wife is private, Alexander replied, stepping fully into the room. And from what I overheard, you've crossed several lines that can't be uncrossed. Marcus watched as the crown prince moved with deliberate purpose toward the confrontation. Alexander was younger than Damien by 2 years, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had been groomed for leadership since birth. His presence seemed to fill the room, commanding attention and respect in a way that Damien's aggressive posturing never could. You misunderstood what you heard, Damien said, finally releasing Elena's arm as Alexander approached. I was simply having a discussion about kingdom policy with the princess. Kingdom policy that involves threats of accidents? Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. Policy that requires physical restraint? I may be young, Damien, but I'm not stupid. Elena moved away from the window, gravitating toward her husband with visible relief. Marcus could see the red marks on her arm where Damien's grip had been too tight, evidence of an assault that went far beyond appropriate family disagreement. You're overreacting, Damien said, but his confidence was clearly shaken by Alexander's unexpected arrival. Elena and I were simply having a passionate discussion about the future of the kingdom. Sometimes these conversations get heated. Heated enough to leave bruises? Alexander asked, gently taking Elena's arm and examining the marks. Heated enough to make my wife fear for her safety? Marcus saw something change in Alexander's expression as he looked at the evidence of Damien's aggression. The Crown Prince had always been known for his measured responses and diplomatic approach to conflicts, but there was steel beneath his civilized exterior, and that steel was now fully visible. This ends now, Alexander said, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. Your presence in this family has been tolerated because of Mother Victoria's marriage to father. But you are not above the law. You are not above decency, and you are certainly not above the consequences of threatening a member of this royal family. You can't prove anything, Damien said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. It's her word against mine, and who do you think the family will believe? They'll believe their future king. Alexander replied simply, and they'll believe the evidence. It was then that Marcus realized Alexander had noticed his presence. A subtle gesture from the Crown Prince indicated that Marcus should make himself known, that his witness to the events would be crucial to ensuring Damien faced appropriate consequences for his actions. Marcus stepped out from behind a pillar, his uniform immediately identifying him as palace security. Of his years of service, his reputation for integrity, and his unimpeachable loyalty to the crown were all evident in his bearing. Captain Sterling has been conducting his evening rounds, Alexander said, his voice now carrying a note of grim satisfaction. I'm sure he observed enough of this discussion to provide an accurate account of what transpired. The color drained from Damien's face as he realized the implications. A trained security officer's testimony would carry enormous weight with both the family and any legal proceedings that might follow. His threats and physical aggression had been witnessed by someone whose word would never be questioned. This isn't over, Damien said, but the threat rang hollow now. Resistance. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and out of options.
You're absolutely right, Alexander replied.
This is just the beginning. Captain Sterling, please escort Prince Damien to his quarters and ensure he remains there until Father can be informed of tonight's events. As Marcus moved to comply with the Crown Prince's orders, he reflected on how quickly the evening had transformed from routine patrol to a moment that would reshape the royal family's dynamics forever. The secret he now carried wasn't just about protecting individual family members. It was about protecting the very integrity of the monarchy itself. The foundations of trust that held the royal family together had been cracked tonight, and Marcus knew that the reverberations would be felt throughout the palace for years to come. As he escorted a sullenly silent Prince Damien through the corridors, where portraits of noble ancestors seemed to watch with disapproving eyes, Marcus wondered if the kingdom would ever be the same. The rain continued to drum against the windows as they walked, washing the palace grounds clean while inside the storm was just beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows through the stained glass windows of the palace chapel as Marcus Sterling knelt in the front pew, his weathered hands clasped in prayer. Sleep had eluded him through the night, his mind replaying the events in the blue salon over and over like a broken record. The weight of what he had witnessed pressed down on him like a physical burden, heavier than any armor he had ever worn. Hours had passed since he had escorted Prince Damien to his quarters, and in that time, the palace had transformed from its usual nighttime tranquility to something that felt more like a fortress under siege. Additional security measures had been quietly implemented. Staff movements had been restricted, and an emergency meeting of the senior royal family members had been called for dawn. Marcus rose from his knees as the chapel door opened behind him. Crown Prince Alexander entered, his usual composed demeanor showing cracks of exhaustion and stress. The events of the previous evening had aged him, carving new lines around his eyes and adding weight to his shoulders that went beyond physical fatigue. "Captain Sterling," Alexander said, his voice echoing softly in the sacred space. "I hoped I might find you here." "Your Highness," Marcus replied, standing at attention despite the informal setting. "How is Princess Elena this morning?" Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "She's strong, but shaken. The bruises on her arm are worse this morning, and the physician confirmed they're consistent with forceful restraint. But it's not the physical marks that concern me most. It's the fear in her eyes when she thought I hadn't returned in time last night." Marcus felt a surge of protective anger rise in his chest. Throughout his years of service, he had developed genuine affection for Princess Elena, whose kindness to palace staff and dedication to charitable causes had earned the respect and love of everyone who worked with her. The thought of her being terrorized in her own home was intolerable. "What did the king decide?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. Royal family disputes were notoriously difficult to resolve, especially when they involved step-family relationships and political implications. Alexander moved to the window, gazing out at the palace gardens where early morning mist still clung to the manicured lawns. "Father is conflicted. Queen Victoria is his wife, and Damien is her son. She's pleading for leniency, claiming that Damien was simply passionate about kingdom affairs and that the situation was misunderstood." "Misunderstood?" Marcus couldn't keep the disbelief out of his voice. "The program. Your Highness, I witnessed the entire confrontation. Prince Damien's threats were explicit, and his physical aggression was unmistakable." "I know that, and you know that," Alexander replied, turning back to face the captain. "But family politics are more complicated than simple right and wrong. Victoria has threatened to leave the kingdom if Damien faces serious consequences. The scandal of a queen abandoning her husband and crown would be devastating for the monarchy's reputation." In his eyes, Marcus felt a chill of understanding. The royal family was trapped between justice and public perception, between protecting Elena and maintaining the facade of unity that kept the monarchy stable. It was a position he had seen them navigate before, but never with stakes this high. "What does Princess Elena want to do?" Marcus asked. Alexander's expression darkened further. "She wants to pretend it never happened. She's terrified that pursuing justice will tear the family apart and damage the crown's reputation. She's willing to sacrifice her own safety for the good of the kingdom." The selflessness was typical of Princess Elena, but it made Marcus's blood boil. The idea that she should have to endure threats and violence to preserve royal harmony was antithetical to everything he had sworn to protect when he took his oath of service. "That's unacceptable, Your Highness," Marcus said, his voice firm despite the breach of protocol and contradicting royal family decisions. Eyes into which others sell a protest to be placed in continued danger. The protesters on the bucking were placed to the British and Russia light turned, waving separation as to matter what. Alexander studied the older man for a long moment, reading the depth of his commitment in his weathered features. "That's why I came to find you, Captain. I need to know that I can count on your absolute discretion and loyalty in the coming days." "You have both, always," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Even if what I ask of you conflicts with direct orders from the king?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that went far beyond palace protocol. Marcus understood that Alexander was asking him to choose between his duty to the crown as an institution and his duty to protect the individuals who wore that crown. "What are you asking of me, Your Highness?" Alexander moved closer, lowering his voice even though they were alone in the chapel. "Dad, I'm asking you to help me protect my wife, even if it means working outside official channels. I'm asking you to be my eyes and ears when I can't be there personally. Be passive. And I'm asking you to be prepared to act if Damien's behavior escalates further." Marcus considered the request carefully. What Alexander was proposing wasn't quite insubordination, but it was certainly operating in the gray areas of palace protocol. However, his primary duty had always been to protect the royal family, and if the official channels were failing in that mission, alternative approaches might be necessary. I accept, Marcus said simply. What do you need me to do? First, I need detailed documentation of everything you witnessed last night, not just for official reports, but for insurance. If this situation deteriorates, we may need evidence that can't be questioned or dismissed.
Already done, Your Highness.
I completed a comprehensive report immediately after escorting Prince Damien to his quarters. Alexander nodded approvingly. Second, I need you to quietly coordinate with select security personnel to ensure Elena is never alone with Damien. This needs to be subtle. We can't appear to be treating him as a prisoner or a threat, but we also can't allow him opportunities for further intimidation. I can arrange discreet protective details without drawing attention, Marcus confirmed. What about his movements within the palace? That's where it gets complicated. Father has agreed to restrict Damien from Elena's private quarters and work areas, but he still has access to common areas and family functions. Victoria insisted on that as a compromise. Mounting. A compromise that left Elena vulnerable was no compromise at all. It was simply delayed danger. Your Highness, with respect, that arrangement is inadequate from a security perspective.
I agree completely. Alexander replied, which brings me to the third thing I need from you.
I want you to investigate Damien's activities over the past few months. His financial dealings, his associations, his communications. I have a feeling that what happened last night wasn't an isolated incident of bad temper. The request made perfect sense to Marcus. The key, in his experience, the kind of calculated intimidation that Damien had displayed usually had a history behind it. People didn't typically escalate to threats and physical aggression without previous patterns of problematic behavior. I'll need authorization to access certain records, Marcus said. You'll have it. I'm appointing you as special security advisor to the Crown Prince's household. That should give you the access you need without raising questions about why you're investigating a member of the royal family. Marcus felt the weight of the new responsibility settling on his shoulders. The position would give him unprecedented access to information and authority within the palace, but it would also make him a target if Damien discovered what he was doing.
There's one more thing, Alexander continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper.
Plans. If Damien's behavior escalates, if he poses a direct threat to Elena or any other family member, I need options that don't require going through official channels that might be compromised by family politics. EP was the most dangerous request of all. Alexander was essentially asking Marcus to prepare for the possibility of taking action against a member of the royal family without royal approval. It was territory that could easily be construed as treason if handled incorrectly. Your Highness, what you're asking? I know exactly what I'm asking, Alexander interrupted, his voice carrying the steel of absolute determination. I ask. I'm asking you to help me protect my wife and this family from a threat that exists within our own household. I'm asking you to be prepared to act if the official systems fail us. Marcus looked into the young prince's eyes and saw not just determination, but desperation. Alexander loved his wife deeply, and the thought of her being terrorized in her own home was driving him to consider options that went against his natural diplomatic instincts. Coming in, back into the contingency's placehouse. Thank you, Captain. I know I'm asking a lot of you. You're asking me to do my job, Marcus replied firmly. Protecting this family has been my life's work. Paper of so Cyprian protocols is compromised that mission. The sound of footsteps echoing in the corridor outside interrupted their conversation. Both men tensed, aware that their discussion needed to remain absolutely confidential. The chapel door opened, and Princess Elena entered, her movements careful and controlled, but her face showing the strain of the previous night's trauma. Alexander, she said, relief evident in her voice as she saw her husband.
I was looking for you.
Marcus noticed immediately that Elena was favoring her left arm slightly.
And the high neckline of her dress couldn't quite conceal what appeared to be additional bruising.
Alape, his protective instincts flared, and he had to consciously control his expression to avoid revealing the depth of his anger. How are you feeling this morning, Your Highness? Marcus asked gently. Elena managed a weak smile. I've been better, Captain Sterling, but I wanted to thank you for your intervention last night. If you hadn't been there to witness what happened, no thanks necessary, Your Highness. I was simply doing my duty. Alexander moved to his wife's side, carefully taking her uninjured hand. Elena, we were just discussing additional security measures to ensure your safety going forward. A flash of alarm crossed Elena's features. Alexander, we discussed this. I don't want to escalate the situation. If we make too big an issue of what happened, it could tear the family apart. The family is already damaged, Alexander replied, his voice gentle but firm, pretending otherwise won't make us safer. Marcus watched the exchange with growing concern. 3. Elena's desire to minimize the situation was understandable but dangerous. In his experience, predators like Damien interpreted mercy as weakness and escalated their behavior accordingly.
Your Highness, Marcus said carefully, in my professional opinion, taking precautions now is the best way to prevent future incidents.
Discreet security measures can actually help maintain family harmony by removing opportunities for confrontation. Elena considered this for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. I suppose you're right. I just don't want to live in fear in my own home. You shouldn't have to, Alexander said, his voice carrying a note of the fury he was keeping carefully controlled. And if I have anything to say about it, you won't have to much longer. Marcus caught the implication in Alexander's words and felt a chill of premonition. The Crown Prince was planning something beyond the security measures they had discussed, something that would resolve the threat permanently. While Marcus supported protecting Elena at all costs, he was concerned about what actions Alexander might be contemplating in his current state of protective fury. Your Highness, Marcus said carefully, perhaps we should focus on immediate security concerns and address longer-term solutions through proper channels. Alexander's eyes met his with an intensity that confirmed Marcus's suspicions. The Crown Prince was indeed planning something more permanent than enhanced security, and he was warning Marcus to be prepared for whatever that might entail. The chapel bells began to chime the hour, their resonant tones filling the sacred space and reminding all three of them that the day's official duties would soon begin. The royal family would need to present a united front to the public, despite the fractures that threatened to tear them apart behind closed doors. I should return to my quarters and prepare for today's engagements, Elena said, though Marcus noticed her reluctance to leave the safety of her husband's presence. I'll escort you, Alexander said immediately. That's not necessary. It is necessary, Alexander interrupted, his tone broking no argument. Until this situation is resolved, you don't go anywhere alone. Marcus approved of Alexander's protective stance, but he was also concerned about the sustainability of such intensive personal protection. The Crown Prince had his own duties and responsibilities that would eventually require him to be away from Elena, and that's when she would be most vulnerable. Ruckers, as they prepared to leave the chapel, Marcus made a silent vow to himself. Whatever it took, whatever the personal cost, he would not allow Princess Elena to be harmed on his watch. The events of the previous night had shown him that the traditional protocols and family hierarchies that governed palace life were inadequate to deal with the threat that Prince Damien represented. The game had changed, and Marcus would change with it. His loyalty to the crown had always been absolute, but his loyalty to the individuals who wore that crown ran even deeper. If protecting them required bending rules or operating in gray areas, then that's what he would do. As they walked through the palace corridors together, Marcus began mentally cataloging all the things he would need to accomplish in the coming days. His investigation into Damien's background would need to be thorough but discreet. His security arrangements would need to be comprehensive but subtle, and his contingency plans would need to be decisive but deniable. The storm that had begun in the Blue Salon the previous night was far from over. In fact, Marcus suspected it was just beginning to gather strength. About a weather lay ahead, and he would ensure that when the storm finally passed, Princess Elena would still be standing safe and unharmed. A second in the Blue Salon, Marcus Sterling sat in his newly assigned office, reviewing files that painted a disturbing picture of Prince Damien's activities over the past 18 months. As special security advisor to the Crown Prince's household, he now had access to financial records, communication logs, and surveillance reports that revealed a pattern of behavior far more troubling than anyone had suspected. The office itself was modest, but strategically located in the administrative wing of the palace, with windows that provided clear sight lines to the family quarters and formal reception areas. Marcus had chosen this location deliberately. ensuring he could monitor the movements of both family members and visitors, while maintaining the appearance of routine administrative work. A soft knock interrupted his concentration. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, one of his most trusted security officers, entered with a manila folder tucked discreetly under her arm. Chen had been handpicked by Marcus for this assignment due to her exemplary record, her analytical skills, and most importantly, her absolute discretion. "Captain, I have the information you requested," she said, closing the door behind her and activating a small electronic device that would prevent any surveillance equipment from recording their conversation. "What did you find?" Marcus asked, gesturing for her to take a seat across from his desk. Chen opened the folder and extracted several documents. Prince Damien's financial activities are complex. On the surface, everything appears legitimate. Investments in various business ventures, charitable donations, standard expenses for someone of his position. But when you dig deeper, the picture becomes much more concerning. She spread out a series of bank statements and transaction records. Over the past year, he's been receiving regular payments from a shell company called Meridian Holdings. The amounts aren't large enough to trigger automatic oversight, usually between £5,000 and £15,000 per month. But they're consistent, and they don't correspond to any legitimate business arrangement I can identify. Marcus studied the documents, his trained eye picking out patterns that confirmed his growing suspicions. "Have you been able to trace the source of these payments?" "That's where it gets interesting," Chen replied, pulling out another set of documents. Meridian Holdings is registered in 3 different countries, with layers of corporate structures designed to obscure ownership. However, I was able to trace at least part of the funding back to a consortium of foreign investors who have been lobbying for changes to the kingdom's agricultural and mining policies. The implications hit Marcus immediately. Damien wasn't just a disgruntled stepson with anger management issues. He was potentially compromised by outside interests seeking to influence royal policy through manipulation of a family member. "What kind of policy changes are they seeking?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Relaxation of environmental protections, reduced worker safety requirements, favorable tax treatment for foreign extraction companies. Essentially, they want access to the kingdom's natural resources with minimal regulatory oversight." Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Damien's pressure on Princess Elena suddenly made more sense. She had been a vocal advocate for environmental protection and workers' rights, often using her platform to highlight the importance of sustainable development. If Damien was being paid to influence royal policy, Elena's principled stance would be a significant obstacle to his handler's agenda. "There's more," Chen continued. "I also found records of regular meetings between Prince Damien and several individuals who are on our watch list for potential security threats. The meetings are always in public places, restaurants, cultural events, charity functions, but the frequency and timing suggest they're not social encounters." She handed him a series of photographs taken by palace security at various public events. Marcus recognized Damien in each image, but the other individuals were unfamiliar to him. However, their body language and positioning suggested they were engaged in serious discussions rather than casual conversation.
"Who are these people?" Marcus asked.
"Products of broken businesses, lobbyists, and what appear to be intelligence operatives from at least 2 different countries. None of them have official diplomatic status, but all of them have been present at events where Prince Damien was also in attendance." The scope of the potential threat was becoming clear to Marcus. This wasn't just about family dysfunction or personal animosity toward Princess Elena. Damien had become a conduit for foreign influence within the royal family, and his recent escalation in threatening behavior might be connected to pressure from his handlers to produce results. "What about his communications?" Marcus asked. Chen pulled out another folder. "This is where his operational security breaks down. While he's careful about his financial transactions and public meetings, his personal communications show a pattern of increasingly desperate attempts to deliver on whatever promises he's made to his foreign contacts. While nothing explicitly incriminating was spelled out, the tone and context painted a picture of someone under significant pressure to influence royal family decisions. The agricultural minister is proving more stubborn than anticipated. Chen read from one transcript. ABCC reference. As parents and husbands were taken by Becky Open. That was from a conversation 3 weeks ago with someone we've identified as a representative of Meridian Holdings. Marcus felt his jaw clench as he recognized the timeline. 3 weeks ago was just before Damien's threats toward Princess Elena had escalated. The connection was becoming undeniable. Elena's advocacy for environmental protection and agricultural worker rights had made her a target not just of Damien's personal ambition, but of a coordinated foreign influence operation. Direct threats or planning for violence? Marcus asked, dreading the answer. Nothing explicit, but there are several concerning communications from the past week. After the incident in the Blue Salon, there's been increased chatter about implementing more direct solutions and removing obstacles to progress. The clinical language sent a chill through Marcus. In his military experience, such euphemisms often preceded violent action. The threat to Princess Elena was not only real, but potentially escalating beyond intimidation toward actual harm. Pecture, Marcus asked, if we need to brief the Crown Prince or take this to higher authorities, what can we prove? Chain organized the documents into neat stacks. The financial connections are solid. We can definitively prove that Prince Damien has been receiving money from foreign sources with interests in influencing kingdom policy. The meeting records establish a pattern of contact with potential intelligence operatives. The communications show increasing pressure and discussion of escalated tactics. But no smoking gun? Marcus pressed. Not yet. However, there's one more thing that might be relevant. According to Palace Communications records, Prince Damien has requested several private meetings with King Edmund over the past month. The requests have been approved, but no official record exists of what was discussed. This information alarmed Marcus more than anything else he'd heard. If Damien had been meeting privately with the king, he might have been attempting to poison the monarch's view of Elena or manipulate royal policy decisions directly. The fact that Queen Victoria would have supported such meetings made the situation even more dangerous. Lieutenant Chen, I need you to coordinate with the Palace Communications team to monitor all of Prince Damien's electronic communications going forward. I also want surveillance on his movements within the palace, discreet but comprehensive. Consider it done, Captain. B. What about briefing the Crown Prince on what we've discovered? Marcus considered the question carefully. Alexander needed to know about the scope of the threat, but he was also concerned about how the Crown Prince might react to learning that his stepbrother was potentially working with foreign intelligence services. I'll brief His Highness personally once we have all the documentation organized. This information changes everything about how we need to approach Princess Elena's protection. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's secure phone buzzed with an urgent message from Alexander. Need to see you immediately. Elena's quarters. I'm alone. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The tone of the message suggested something had happened, and given everything they'd just discovered about Damien's foreign connections, the timing felt ominous. Continue gathering intelligence but implement enhanced protective protocols for Princess Elena immediately, and activate our emergency response plans. I have a feeling we may need them sooner than expected. Chen nodded grimly and gathered the documents. I'll have additional security personnel in position within the hour. Marcus locked the sensitive files in his secure safe and headed toward Elena's quarters, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. The information Chen had uncovered painted a picture of a threat that went far beyond family drama. Princess Elena wasn't just dealing with an unstable stepbrother. She was potentially the target of a sophisticated foreign influence operation that was prepared to use violence to achieve its goals. As he walked through the palace corridors, Marcus noticed additional security personnel discreetly positioning themselves at strategic locations. The palace staff moved with the subtle tension that indicated everyone was aware something significant was happening, even if they didn't know the specific details. When Marcus reached Elena's quarters, he found Alexander pacing in the sitting room, while Elena sat on a couch, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. The Crown Prince looked up as Marcus entered, his expression a mixture of fury and fear that Marcus had never seen before. What's happened? Marcus asked immediately. Alexander handed him a piece of paper, expensive stationery with an elegant handwritten message. Marcus read it quickly and felt his blood run cold. Dear Elena, your recent lack of cooperation in family matters has been noted with disappointment. For the good of the kingdom and your own well-being, I suggest you reconsider your positions on certain policy matters. There are people who are very invested in seeing progress made, and they are not as patient or forgiving as family should be. I would hate for your stubbornness to result in unfortunate consequences for yourself or those you care about. Perhaps we should have another private discussion soon to clarify your future role in this family. With sincere concern for your welfare, Damien. The message was a masterpiece of plausible deniability, threatening enough to terrorize Elena, but carefully worded to avoid explicit admission of criminal intent. However, in light of what Marcus had just learned about Damien's foreign connections, the people who were very invested took on a much more sinister meaning.
When did this arrive?
Marcus asked. 20 minutes ago, Alexander replied. It was delivered to Elena's private secretary by one of the palace messengers, who said Prince Damien had requested immediate delivery. Her silence and the tremor in her hands suggested she was more than just frightened. She was approaching a state of shock from the sustained psychological pressure.
Your Highness, Marcus said gently to Elena, I know this is frightening, but I need you to understand that you're not facing this threat alone anymore.
We've discovered information about Prince Damien's activities that changes how we need to respond to this situation.
Elena looked up at him with eyes that held a mixture of hope and despair.
What kind of information? Marcus glanced at Alexander, who nodded for him to proceed. We have evidence that Prince Damien has been receiving money from foreign interests seeking to influence kingdom policy. The threats against you aren't just personal. They're part of a larger operation to manipulate royal family decisions. The revelation seemed to awaken something in Elena's demeanor. The trembling in her hands stopped, and her posture straightened as understanding dawned in her eyes. The agricultural policies, she said quietly. The environmental protections I've been advocating for. They've been trying to get me to stop because it interferes with their business interests.
Exactly, Marcus confirmed.
Your principled stance on these issues has made you a target not just of Prince Damien, but of the people who are paying him to influence royal policy. Alexander's fury was now clearly directed not just at the threat to his wife, but at the betrayal of the crown by someone who had been welcomed into the royal family. Turi, how long has this been going on? Based on the financial records, at least 18 months, Marcus replied. But the direct threats against Princess Elena appear to have escalated recently, possibly because his handlers are pressuring him to produce results. Elena stood up from the couch, her earlier fear transforming into determination. Then we have to stop him, not just for my safety, but for the integrity of the crown. Marcus felt a surge of respect for the princess. Even under extreme duress, her first concern was for the institution she served, rather than her personal safety. It was exactly the kind of character that made her worth protecting. We will stop him, Alexander said firmly. But first we need to ensure your immediate safety. Captain Sterling, what are our options? Marcus had been preparing for this moment since their conversation in the chapel 3 days earlier. We have several alternatives, Your Highness, but they all involve operating outside normal palace protocols. I'm prepared for that, Alexander replied. What do you recommend? First, we need to document everything we've discovered and prepare a comprehensive briefing for His Majesty. The king needs to understand the full scope of what Prince Damien has been doing. And if Father chooses family harmony over justice again? Alexander asked, his voice carrying bitter skepticism. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Then we implement the contingency plans we discussed. Princess Elena's safety takes priority over all other considerations. The weight of that commitment settled over all three of them. They were potentially talking about taking action against a member of the royal family without royal approval, crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. I understand the risks, Elena said quietly, but I won't be intimidated into abandoning my principles. If these people think they can manipulate royal policy through threats and violence, they've underestimated what this family stands for. Marcus smiled grimly. Princess Elena's courage in the face of sustained intimidation reminded him why he had dedicated his life to protecting the royal family. Some things were worth any risk to defend. Then we move forward, Alexander said. Captain Sterling, implement whatever measures you deem necessary to protect my wife. And prepare those contingency plans. Something tells me we're going to need them. The emergency meeting in the king's private study had been called for 8 o'clock that evening, but Marcus Sterling arrived an hour early to prepare the room and review his presentation materials one final time. The study, with its walls lined with first-edition books and portraits of past monarchs, had witnessed countless moments of royal decision-making throughout the centuries. Tonight, It would host a confrontation that could determine the future of the monarchy itself. Marcus arranged the evidence carefully on the king's massive oak desk: financial records, surveillance photographs, communication transcripts, and the threatening note that Prince Damien had sent to Princess Elena. Each document told part of a larger story of betrayal and foreign manipulation that reached to the very heart of the royal family. King Edmund arrived precisely at 8, his bearing still regal despite his advancing years. Queen Victoria accompanied him, her face set in the determined expression of someone prepared to defend her son regardless of the evidence presented. Crown Prince Alexander and Princess Elena entered together, their united front a stark contrast to the tension radiating from the king's wife, Captain Sterling. The king said as he settled into his chair behind the desk, "Prince Alexander has briefed me on the general nature of your findings, but I want to hear the specifics directly from you." Marcus had rehearsed this presentation, knowing that everything would depend on his ability to present the facts clearly and persuasively. "Your Majesty, over the past week we've uncovered evidence of a sustained foreign influence operation targeting the royal family through Prince Damien. He began with the financial records, methodically walking through the pattern of payments from Meridian Holdings and the shell companies that concealed their true source." King Edmund listened with increasing gravity as Marcus explained how the money could be traced back to foreign interests, seeking to influence the kingdom's agricultural and environmental policies. "These are serious allegations," Queen Victoria interjected, her voice sharp with defensive anger. "You're accusing my son of being some kind of foreign agent based on what? Business investments, charitable activities?" "Your Majesty," Marcus replied respectfully, "the evidence goes beyond financial transactions." Who presented the surveillance photograph showing Damien's meetings with suspected intelligence operatives, the communication intercepts revealing pressure to remove obstacles to progress, and finally the threatening note to Princess Elena that had prompted the emergency meeting. King Edmund studied each document carefully, his weathered face growing more grave with each piece of evidence. "The financial connections are concerning," he said finally, "but they could potentially be explained as poor judgment rather than deliberate betrayal." Marcus felt his heart sink. Even faced with overwhelming evidence, the king was still looking for ways to minimize his stepson's actions to preserve family unity. "Father," Alexander said, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "Damien threatened my wife with unfortunate consequences if she didn't change her policy positions. These aren't the actions of someone exercising poor judgment. They're the actions of someone working against the interests of this kingdom." "Alexander has a point," Princess Elena added quietly. "The threats weren't about family disagreements or personal animosity. They were specifically focused on getting me to abandon my advocacy for environmental protection and agricultural worker rights, exactly the policies that these foreign interests want changed."
Queen Victoria's face had grown increasingly pale as the evidence mounted, but her voice remained defiant.
"Even if Damien has made some mistakes, he's still family. We can handle this internally without destroying him or damaging the crown's reputation." "Handle it how?" Alexander demanded. "By allowing him to continue threatening Elena? By pretending that foreign money hasn't been influencing royal policy discussions? By ignoring the fact that he's already escalated to physical violence?" The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation settled over everyone present. King Edmund looked every one of his 73 years as he contemplated a decision that had no good options. "Captain Sterling," the king said finally, "what are you recommending?" Marcus had prepared for this moment, knowing that his answer would likely determine whether Princess Elena received adequate protection or continued to face escalating threats. Prince Damien's access to sensitive family information and royal policy discussions. I recommend a full investigation of his financial activities by appropriate authorities. And I recommend implementing comprehensive security measures to protect Princess Elena from further intimidation or violence. And if I'm not prepared to take those steps?" the king asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus understood that the king was asking whether he would accept a decision to prioritize family unity over Elena's safety. "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, "my oath is to protect this family. If official channels prove inadequate to that mission, I'm prepared to explore alternative approaches." The protection was clear, and King Edmund's eyes sharpened as he recognized the subtle threat. Marcus was telling him that Elena would be protected whether the king approved appropriate measures or not. Before the king could respond, a sharp knock interrupted the tense discussion. Lieutenant Chen entered with an expression of urgent concern. "Captain Sterling, Your Majesties, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Chen would never interrupt a royal family meeting unless something critical had happened. What is it, Lieutenant? Marcus asked. Prince Damien has left the palace without authorization. That reported losing contact with him approximately 30 minutes ago. His vehicle was found abandoned at the Marina District, and we've lost all tracking of his movements, apparently in the rooms simultaneously. Damien's disappearance, particularly at night and in an area known for its international shipping connections, suggested either flight or preparation for some kind of escalated action. How did he leave without authorization? King Edmund demanded. He dismissed his security detail, claiming he was retiring for the evening, Chen replied. By the time they realized he had left his quarters, he had already exited the palace grounds using a service entrance that bypassed normal security checkpoints. Damien had planned this departure carefully, using his knowledge of palace security procedures to evade detection until he was already gone. The timing, coming just as his activities were being exposed to the royal family, suggested he had been warned about the investigation. Your Majesty, Marcus said urgently, this changes everything. Prince Damien's flight suggests he knows his activities have been discovered. If he's working with foreign operatives, his disappearance could signal preparation for a more direct attack against Princess Elena. Damien wouldn't hurt anyone.
He's just confused and angry.
Your Majesty, Marcus replied as gently as possible. People working for foreign intelligence services often use family members who don't fully understand what they're being asked to do.
But Prince Damien may have started with simple information gathering or influence operations, but these organizations often escalate their demands over time. That's enough speculation. Elena, you're coming with me to secure quarters immediately. Captain Sterling, implement whatever emergency protocols you deem necessary. Alexander, wait, King Edmund called. We need to think this through carefully. There's nothing to think through, Father, Alexander replied, his voice carrying the full authority of his position as heir to the throne, the byroots and the surface of Buckingham mouths. And now the person making them has disappeared with possible foreign intelligence connections. I won't risk her safety for one more second while we debate family politics. Princess Elena rose to stand beside her husband, her earlier fear replaced by determined resolve. Your Majesty, she said to the king, I understand your desire to protect family unity, but I won't be a martyr to preserve it. If Prince Damien has chosen to work against the interests of this kingdom, then he's chosen to forfeit his place in this family.
The transformation in Elena's demeanor was striking.
The frightened woman who had been intimidated in the blue salon had been replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to be sacrificed for others' political calculations. King Edmund looked around the room at the faces of his family members, his son's determined protectiveness, his daughter-in-law's courageous resolve, his wife's desperate denial, and his security captain's professional readiness. The decision he made in the next few moments would define not only Elena's safety, but the moral foundation of his reign. Captain Sterling, the king said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of kingship, you have my authorization to implement whatever security measures you deem necessary to protect Princess Elena. You also have my authorization to coordinate with appropriate law enforcement and intelligence agencies regarding Prince Damien's activities and current whereabouts. Desmond, you can't. I can and I must, the king replied firmly. My first duty is to the crown and to the people of this kingdom. The duty supersedes family relationships when those relationships threaten the integrity of the monarchy itself. Marcus felt a surge of respect for the elderly monarch. Despite the personal cost and political complications, King Edmund was choosing to do what was right rather than what was easy. Thank you, Your Majesty, Marcus replied, to implement enhanced security immediately. What about finding Damien? Alexander asked. We'll work with national intelligence services and international law enforcement to track his movements, Marcus replied. Given his connections to foreign operatives, he may attempt to leave the country. We need to find him before he can either flee or escalate his actions against Princess Elena. Yes, Christ. As the meeting began to break up, Chen approached Marcus with additional information. Captain, we've received intelligence from port security that a private yacht with foreign registry departed from the Marina District approximately 15 minutes after Prince Damien's vehicle was found. The bell. Departure wasn't scheduled and the vessel refused to respond to radio contact. Damien had likely fled the kingdom aboard the yacht, possibly accompanied by his foreign handlers. While this removed the immediate physical threat to Elena, it raised new questions about what information he might have taken with him and what future threats might emerge from his collaboration with foreign interests. Your Majesty, Marcus said to King Edmund, we may need to consider that Prince Damien has defected to foreign interests. This will require coordination with our intelligence services to assess what sensitive information he may have compromised. The king nodded grimly. Do whatever is necessary, Captain Sterling. The security of this kingdom and this family is in your hands. As the royal family members left the study to prepare for what would undoubtedly be a sleepless night, Marcus reflected on how dramatically everything had changed in just 1 week. What had begun as a family dispute had revealed a sophisticated foreign influence operation that had nearly succeeded in compromising royal policy through intimidation and threats. But Elena was safe. The truth had been exposed, and the threat had been neutralized, at least for now. Presque, Marcus knew that Damien's escape would create new challenges. But tonight, Princess Elena could sleep peacefully for the first time in months. The storm that had threatened to destroy the royal family had passed, leaving them damaged but intact, and Marcus Sterling had once again proven that some things were worth any risk to protect. 6 months had passed since Prince Damien's disappearance aboard the foreign yacht, and Westmere Palace had settled into a new rhythm of cautious normalcy. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Marcus Sterling's office as he reviewed the final intelligence report on what had become known within security circles as Operation Royal Shield. The investigation had uncovered a web of foreign influence that extended far beyond Damien's involvement, leading to several arrests and the exposure of a sophisticated network aimed at manipulating small kingdom policies throughout Europe. Marcus set down the classified document and walked to his window, gazing out at the palace gardens where Princess Elena was hosting a charity event for agricultural workers' rights. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very cause that had made her a target was now thriving under her continued advocacy, protected by security measures that had become nearly invisible but absolutely comprehensive. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Lieutenant Chen entered, now promoted to Deputy Chief of Royal Security, carrying a folder marked with the highest classification levels. Captain, we've received final confirmation from Interpol about Prince Damien's status, she said, closing the door behind her and activating their standard security protocols. Marcus turned from the window, noting the gravity in Chen's expression. What did they find? The yacht he escaped on was intercepted by naval forces from 3 different countries after it entered international waters. Prince Damien and 4 foreign nationals were taken into custody. Under questioning, Damien provided extensive cooperation about the influence operation in exchange for protection from his former handlers. What did he reveal? Marcus asked, settling behind his desk to review the documents Chen had brought. The operation had been running for nearly 3 years, not just 18 months as we initially believed. The goal was to create a template for influencing small European monarchies through manipulation of family members. Princess Elena was targeted specifically because her environmental advocacy was seen as a model that other royal families might adopt, potentially affecting resource extraction operations across multiple countries. And because of her specific policy positions, she had been targeted as part of a much larger geopolitical strategy. What's Damien's current status? Marcus asked. He will likely face charges in several jurisdictions. However, his cooperation has been valuable enough that he may receive reduced sentences in exchange for continued intelligence cooperation. The door opened again, and Crown Prince Alexander entered with Princess Elena beside him. Both looked more relaxed than Marcus had seen them in over a year, though he noticed that Elena still unconsciously moved closer to her husband when entering rooms, a subtle reminder of the trauma she had endured. Captain Sterling, Deputy Chen, Alexander said warmly. We wanted to speak with both of you about some important developments. Elena stepped forward, her composure and confidence fully restored after months of security and the knowledge that the threat had been neutralized. We wanted to thank you personally for everything you've done. The final intelligence reports showed just how serious the threat really was. Your Highnesses, Marcus replied. We were simply doing our duty. You did far more than duty required, Alexander corrected. You protected not just Elena's physical safety, but the integrity of the crown itself. The operation could have compromised royal policy for years if it hadn't been exposed. Elena nodded, her expression serious despite her recovered confidence. I also wanted you to know that the experience, while traumatic, has strengthened my resolve to continue the work that made me a target in the first place. The agricultural workers' rights legislation passed last month, and the environmental protection measures will be implemented next quarter. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. Not only had they protected Elena from immediate harm, but they had also ensured that the principles she stood for weren't compromised by intimidation or violence. There's something else, Alexander continued. Father has decided to restructure palace security based on the lessons learned from this incident. Captain Sterling, you're being promoted to Chief of Royal Security, with expanded authority to investigate and prevent threats from both internal and external sources. Marcus would now have oversight of all security operations affecting the royal family, with resources and authority that would allow him to prevent future operations like the one they had just defeated.
Thank you, Your Highness.
I'm honored by His Majesty's confidence. There's one more thing, Alina said with a slight smile. We wanted you to be among the first to know. Alexander and I are expecting our first child. The official announcement will be made next week, but we wanted to share the news with the people who helped ensure we could look forward to the future with confidence rather than fear. The news was wonderful but also sobering for Marcus. A royal heir would bring new security challenges and responsibilities. However, he was confident that the lessons learned from the Damien crisis had prepared them for whatever threats might emerge. As the royal couple left to continue their day's engagements, Chen remained behind to discuss the practical implications of Marcus's promotion and Elena's pregnancy. The threat assessment for a royal heir will be significant, she noted, particularly given that some members of the foreign network are still unaccounted for.
Agreed, Marcus replied.
Security measures from the moment the pregnancy is announced publicly, but we'll also need to ensure that Elena's advocacy work continues. We can't allow the threat of future dangers to compromise the principles we fought to protect. Marcus walked back to the window, watching as Elena moved confidently through the charity event, engaging with agricultural workers and their families with the genuine warmth that had made her beloved by the people. The traumatic events of 6 months ago seemed like a distant nightmare, but the lessons learned had fundamentally changed how the palace approached security and family dynamics. The investigation had also revealed uncomfortable truths about how family loyalty could be exploited by hostile interests. King Edmund had implemented new protocols for vetting family members' financial activities and outside associations, measures that would have been unthinkable before the crisis, but were now accepted as necessary protections for the crown. Queen Victoria had requested a transfer to a private residence following Damien's arrest, claiming she could no longer bear to live in the palace where her son had been persecuted. While her departure had been emotionally difficult for King Edmund, it had also eliminated a source of tension and potential security risk. A secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from the kingdom's intelligence service. Marcus read it quickly, noting that 2 more members of the foreign network had been arrested in neighboring countries, further dismantling the operation that had threatened Elena and potentially dozens of other targets across Europe. The scope of what they had uncovered continued to expand with each new arrest and each new piece of intelligence. What had appeared to be an isolated threat against one princess had revealed a continent-wide effort to manipulate royal families and government policies through sophisticated influence operations. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus reviewed security arrangements for the upcoming public announcement of Elena's pregnancy. The event would require balancing public accessibility with comprehensive protection, ensuring that the royal family could share their joy with the people while remaining safe from potential threats. Security assessments for various venue options. The cathedral would provide the best symbolic setting, she noted, but the palace balcony would offer superior security control. Let's plan for both options, Marcus decided. Assessments closer to the announcement date, the door opened once more, and King Edmund himself entered, looking more vigorous and confident than Marcus had seen him in years. The resolution of the family crisis and the exposure of the foreign threat had seemed to reinvigorate the elderly monarch. Chief Sterling, the king said with satisfaction, I wanted to congratulate you personally on your promotion and to discuss some longer-term security initiatives.
Your Majesty, Marcus replied, standing at attention.
The intelligence community has proposed establishing a new joint task force focused on protecting European royal families from foreign influence operations. Given your recent experience and success, they've requested that you lead the kingdom's participation in this effort. The proposal represented a significant expansion of Marcus's responsibilities, but it also offered the opportunity to prevent other families from experiencing what Elena had endured.
I would be honored to serve in that capacity, Your Majesty.
The first meeting is scheduled for next month in Geneva. You'll be working with security chiefs from 7 other monarchies to develop coordinated responses to these types of threats. As King Edmund departed, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his role had evolved. What had begun as routine palace security work had transformed into a position of international significance in protecting democratic institutions from foreign manipulation. The sun was setting over the palace grounds as Marcus completed his final review of the day's security reports. Elena's charity event had concluded successfully, with no incidents and overwhelmingly positive coverage in the national media. The princess's continued public engagement sent a clear message that intimidation and threats would not succeed in silencing principled voices. Times arrived from the International Task Force, outlining the agenda for next month's meeting in Geneva. The topics included threat assessment protocols, information sharing agreements, and coordinated response strategies, all designed to ensure that future operations like the one that had targeted Elena would be detected and defeated before they could cause harm. Marcus locked away the classified documents in his secure safe and prepared to conduct his final security rounds of the day. The palace felt different now, still majestic and historically significant, but also more secure and more purposeful. The crisis had tested everyone involved, but it had also strengthened their resolve and improved their capabilities. As he walked through the corridors where 6 months earlier he had witnessed Prince Damien's threats against Princess Elena, Marcus reflected on how secrets could either protect or destroy, depending on who held them and how they were used. The secret of Damien's betrayal had nearly destroyed the royal family, but the secret of the investigation that exposed him had ultimately saved it. The portraits of past monarchs seemed to watch approvingly as he passed, their painted eyes reflecting the wisdom of generations who had faced their own crises and emerged stronger. Marcus Sterling had now earned his place in that long tradition of those who served to protect not just individual royal lives, but the principles and institutions that made constitutional monarchy a force for good in the world. The storm that had threatened to destroy everything they held dear had passed, leaving behind a royal family that was stronger, more vigilant, and more committed than ever to serving their people with integrity and courage. And Marcus Sterling would continue to guard their secrets, protecting both the crown and the principles it represented for as long as his strength endured. As the palace settled into evening quiet, Marcus completed his rounds with the satisfaction of knowing that Princess Elena could sleep peacefully, that Crown Prince Alexander could look forward to fatherhood without fear, and that the kingdom itself remained secure against those who would manipulate and threaten its foundational institutions. The secret was safe, the family was protected, and justice had prevailed. In Marcus Sterling's world, those were the only victories that truly mattered.